Hello, my name is Olurotimi Osha, and I, of course, like to talk about U.S. history of the world, and of course, American presidents. I've been doing videos recently, and I've been using, um, describing America that in terms that sounds pejorative. That well, Americans are crazy, or there's a mental health crisis, and things like that. And so, of course, I'm finding that I have to do this video because of a pattern, an increasing pattern in America, in its vast echo chamber, in which people are becoming very resistant to respecting the free speech rights of other Americans or other people living in America. And so I'm saying that I'm finding that I have to do a video putting out there that, of course, I love America, right? That I love America, even though I don't have to, I'm not somebody who loves, I'm not a performative person, and I'm not the sort of person who subscribes to the phrase "all veneer, no substance," right? And I'm finding that increasingly, America uh, is becoming this vast watering hole for people that are all veneer, no substance. There's so much performativeness going on in America right now, and without respecting the First Amendment. So I have to put it out there that I love America, right? I love America, even though I'm saying that there's a mental health crisis in America because I want us to address. Wrongs that are going on in the society, right? The spate of killings. This is April, the month of April 2026, and we've been noticing in the news, we've been overwhelmed by the incidents of uh, uh, intimate partner homicides, right? Where men are just killing their wives, killing their family members, and they're finding that even including military veterans, right? They've been killed. They're killing their families, killing people, and that's problematic. Recently, I came across an interview of George W. Bush, that's number 43, with his daughter, right? And he was talking about something he loved about American democracy is that it's self-correcting, right? The fact that he said that, and I agree that America is self-correcting. This is how I saw America before I came to America, when I'd read about America, because there have been so many terrible things that were part of America in the beginning, but you see over time America deals with them. For instance, we had slavery at the beginning of the founding of America, but America fought a war to end slavery. Right? We had once had Jim Crow in America, but America had went through the civil rights movement, and then the Great Society programs and the civil rights uh, acts of the 1960s to end Jim Crow. So we've had all these things going on. So it is proper for President George W. Bush to say America is self correcting. So that, of course, contradicts what I was saying about America being like a vast echo chamber, because a vast echo chamber, if a society is a vast echo chamber, it's redolent of an authoritarian state, right? And but two things can be true at the same time. Maybe this is where we're going to headed towards, or maybe there's um, one section of society that's drowning out the others. But in any event, I do love America because I have rights, and so wanted to really talk about the First Amendment. When I'm talking and I'm publishing, I'm doing these videos, or I'm discussing, or I'm writing, those have to do with the First Amendment rights that we have, and I cherish those First Amendment rights. Just in case people don't know what the First Amendment is, the First Amendment protects. You know, there are five major elements to it, things that it protects, right? And I've done a series of videos explaining rights, explaining. I haven't done a video on the First Amendment, but I think I focused on religion, right? The establishment and free exercise clauses, in the First Amendment. So the First Amendment does so many things for us. I've talked about how I actually took a course in First Amendment in law school, George Washington University Law School. That's another reason why I love America. The great education that I got, America allowed me to have, right? Um, so I did First Amendment. I was taught by one of America's foremost experts on the First Amendment. I'm not going to mention her name for her privacy. And I also wrote my independent legal paper on the First Amendment. So I've done a lot of research on this, on the First Amendment. But the First Amendment is very broad, right? It's very broad. You can't cover it all. But importantly, it has five important elements. One of them, of course, we all know, the freedom of expression, the freedom of speech, right? The freedom of speech, the freedom of the press, right? The freedom of religion. I've talked about freedom of religion. I've done a video on that. So the freedom of religion, that's where you have the Establishment and Free Exercise Clause. There's also the freedom to assemble. Freedom to assemble and protest, hold peaceful protests. That's the fourth element. And then the fifth element, of course, is the right to petition the government for a redress of our grievances, right? We can petition the government if we have complaints. We can go and, we're free to submit our complaints to the government and expect a redress of our grievances. It doesn't have to. So those are things that are protected, our guaranteed rights as American citizens. Now, I'll do another video, a subsequent video, and I'll elaborate more on the First Amendment, because the First Amendment is very robust. I've done videos on discussing the First Amendment, but I chose elements. I didn't go through the whole, all the elements of the First Amendment, because it's a very powerful, a section portion of the United States Constitution. By the way, these amendments, the Bill of Rights, the first 10 are called the Bill of Rights. They are part of the U.S. Constitution, right? They're not separate. They're part of the U.S. Constitution. And they're not appendices or anything. It's not an appendix or anything like that. They are part of the U.S. Constitution. When our founding fathers decided to create this new Constitution in 1787, to create a stronger national government, right? Of course, there was a condition by the delegates, right? Especially the Southern delegates. They wanted to make sure that there was the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights, it's historically called the Bill of Rights from far back as the British, right? The Magna Carta, right? It was sort of a Bill of Rights. Magna Carta of 1215, right? That was in England when they had King John and his warlords, right? The barons, they held him up and they made him sign the Magna Carta. So it's been going on. The British have had several Bill of Rights, right? And so this was our own first Bill of Rights when we're creating the Constitution. And basically, because we created this strong national government, right? We wanted to create a stronger national government because we actually had a government, form of government after the War of Independence, right? But it wasn't strong, and there are all sorts of insurrections all over the place, right? There was Shays' Rebellion. There are all sorts of things going on because of taxes, and the government didn't have the power to tax. It was the states that they taxed their own citizens, and then they chose to they could remit to the central government. We didn't have a standing army, right? A central army. So there were just rebellions all over the place. There was so much lawlessness. So our founding fathers, people like James Madison, and of course the great Alexander Hamilton, America's greatest immigrant, my favorite founding father, they decided that having a stronger central government was essential, that we should have a strong central government. But the delegates from the states, they wanted to make sure that, well, if we had such a strong central government, it might take away the rights of the states and the citizens, right? Because it would be this central government so strong and far away from the people. And, it was like, it was getting like powers of the king, right? The powers of parliament that they just fought to overthrow. And so they wanted to ensure that the citizens in the states had the Bill of Rights, had rights that were protected. And the first one was the First Amendment. And of course, the First Amendment, I've talked about freedom of religion. The government will not establish a religion or prevent the people from the free exercise of a religion, right? And with respect to these videos that I do and my writing, my speech, talking about issues in America, or even my freedom to say, well, America's crazy, right? America's crazy. By the way, that's not defamation. You can't defame a nation. I've done a video explaining defamation. America is not a nation. You can't defame a nation, right? That's my freedom of speech, and clearly it's figurative. Again, figurative expression is also protected, right? It doesn't. It's not defamation, right? So, uh, in that First Amendment, we have freedom of speech. There are limitations to the freedom of speech, and I will discuss those. I'll do another video explaining that. Limitations to freedom of speech includes so your freedom of speech allows you to express your opinion, right? You can express your opinion. It can be spoken. It can be in writing. You can publish it, right? Um, without censorship, right? Without restriction. However, there are limitations, right? For instance, obscenity, right? Obscenity, you have freedom of speech to post stuff, but you can't go and post child pornography. You're free to actually watch pornography, right? But there's a you're free. You have a freedom to watch pornography. You have a freedom to participate in pornography, right? But you can't participate in there's obscenity laws protects you. It prevents you from doing or viewing child porn. So those are exceptions and limitations to the freedom of speech, for instance. In terms of, and then threats, your freedom of speech does not mean you can threaten to kill the United States president or any official. So true threats, you have restrictions against what's called a true threat or imminent lawless action. For instance, you can't incite people to overthrow the United States government. So that's an imminent lawless action, right? Um, you're restricted. Your freedom of speech is restricted against that. It bars you from doing certain things. There's certain things you can't do. So with respect to speech, right? And of course, the libel, right? Your freedom of speech, you can't libel somebody or slander. But remember, I've done a video talking about defamation. So libel and slander fall under defamation. Libel is when it is written. Slander is when you just speak it, when you say it. It's verbal, right? So again, but for something to be libel or slander, libelous or slander, it has to be false, right? It has to be a false statement. So if you're saying the truth or whatever, uh, you know, but you insulting somebody is not defamation. I've done a video explaining that. So you have those freedoms: the freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of the press, right? So freedom of expression is divided into free speech, your own expression as an individual, and then there's the freedom of the press. The press is a body, right? There, so the press are free to publish, right? Publish information, the news, opinions, without government censorship, of course, and there's still restrictions on everything, right? Uh, in within certain respects, they call them time, place, manner restrictions or whatever. That's getting into the weeds of the First Amendment, which I'm not going to do here. But and then of course, I was going to talk about the freedom to protest, right? You have the freedom to assemble peacefully and to protest, right? Of course, so you can't, it has to be peaceful. You can't go and destroy people's property or government property. And it's not peaceful. You can't bring firearms and start shooting people. That's not peaceful, but it's your right to assemble and to protest, right? As American citizens, as Americans. And then there's also your freedom to petition the government, right? You have a right to file complaints. There are no restrictions on how many complaints you can file asking the government to help you resolve a conflict or a problem, right? So I've talked about how I was swatted in my home, and it was in the midst of petitions that I had. I had a complaint. I worked with the federal government. It was my right to petition the government to file a complaint against my boss who were doing things that were, was misconduct in the federal government. Now, somehow, my public defender, the head of the public defender's office, told me that, well, because I filed all these complaints, it gave the perception that I was crazy, right? That's a perception, right? And I said, I told him there was a perception, and that was why the swatting occurred. So they've admitted there was a swatting, that I was a victim of a swatting. That's illegal, right? They made a false, fabricated an emergency. So I had to ask him then. This happened, this was 2 years ago or whatever, over a year ago when he said this. I had to ask him, I said, so there was a perception in the government where I'd filed a complaint that I was crazy because I knew my rights. I knew the Constitution, that if I have a grievance, I filed a complaint. It's in process. It's in progress, right? Not that I went, I took up a gun and started attacking anybody, or I even attacked anyone. No. But because I filed a complaint, you had a perception that I was crazy. Isn't that crazy? That's irrational, right? So by the way, so don't let anybody fool you. You have a right to petition the government. So what they did was, of course, I have to prove it. What they did was illegal. It's called retaliation in the government. And in my case, because I work for the federal government, right, it's called whistleblower. It violates Whistleblower Protection Act, right? So you're allowed to file. You're actually encouraged to file a complaint if you see fraud, waste, or any form of mismanagement, misconduct. You're encouraged to file a complaint. So when them say anybody saying, well, because you filed these complaints, we thought you were crazy, and therefore we fabricated a swatting and try to make it look like you're the crazy person, you're dangerous, you're trying to attack people, because that was what happened, right? So the First Amendment protects your rights to petition the government. I've done a video talking about the gag rule, and at one time the government was actually imposed the gag rule. At that time, the Speaker of the House was President James Polk, who went on to become our 11th president, right? He imposed the gag rule, and to silence particularly our sixth president, who became congressman. That's John Quincy Adams, right? John Quincy Adams, for years, he kept trying to talk about slavery, and they would table it, right? They table it to make sure there were no discussions on slavery on the floor of the House. And so eventually he had the gag rule overturned. And basically he said it violated our rights to petition the government, right? So we have rights to petition the government, right? We don't go and take up arms. We don't become violent if we have a complaint. We go to the government and we make our arguments. That's what the Constitution affords us, right? It guarantees us that right, the right to petition. So, you know, if we have, as Americans, if we have any problem, we have social media, we have a right to draw the attention of people or draw the attention of government. Because remember, in our Constitution, it says that we aim at a more perfect union, and of course, we want to advance the general welfare of the people, of Americans. And so, don't let anybody intimidate you when you petition the government, or when you complain about anything. Those people who are saying that, well, you're crazy for petitioning the government, for bringing your complaints to the government, they're crazy, right? Because clearly they don't know the Constitution, and somehow they're delusional enough to think that, well, they can intimidate you, gaslight you into saying, well, it's not in the Constitution, it's not your constitutional right to be able to petition the government, to file a complaint when there's a problem, right? Uh, the government, right, has a responsibility to look at your grievance, right? Not to just dismiss you and gaslight you and say you're crazy because you're bringing a complaint before it. That's what they do in authoritarian states, in autocratic states. In the USSR under Stalin, that was what they did. If you didn't accept government propaganda, state officials will pick you up, they'll take you into a psychiatric hospital, and they'll start to give you treatment until you accept state propaganda. They had all these apparatchiks. Now, American state government officials, especially because we're having problems, right? We're taking people who are not qualified, people who are not intelligent, many people who are probably crazy, right? They're psychopaths. They're working in the United States government. They're working in state governments. They're working especially in law enforcement. I know most of the people in law enforcement in these counties are numbskulls, right? And numbskulls, many of them, right? The standard to hire a cop is remarkably low, right? It's so low. When I was in law school and I did criminal procedure, a captain came to talk to us, right? Telling us that, look, the problem with police misconduct is because of the low standards, the very, very, have minimal standards to hire a cop. That's where it's the hiring process. Hiring people, the qualifications are so low, and they pick, there's no such thing as hiring an unqualified cop. because that's how low the standards are. And in many states, I've talked about an emergency evaluation petition, and states like Maryland, they're giving these people who are not qualified, right? Maybe they have a GED, they have to just be in the process of taking a GED, from what I learned, in order to qualify for a cop. And they're letting them act like they're psychiatrists. You know how long it takes to qualify as a psychiatrist, as a physician? It takes in university, post university, at least 8 years, years of practice, of training, right, to qualify somebody as a psychiatrist. They give an unqualified cop to make these decisions, these judgment calls, right, over Americans. That's irrational, right? So I was just wanted to talk about the First Amendment, how I love America. And part of my love for America is because it actually protects my freedom of speech, right? To call things, to say a spade is a spade, right? To call things as it is, and not to be afraid that someone's going to come knocking on my door because I expressed my constitutional rights of free speech, freedom of expression, free speech in America. I'm well informed, I'm well trained to exercise those rights appropriately, in the proper manner and proper venue, proper place. My name is Olurotimi Osha, and I will keep you posted. Thank you.